and exploring the ideas shaping our world. This is China Now, your guide to understanding China and its global impact. Good morning and welcome to the show that takes you inside the stories and ideas transforming modern China and its relationship with the world. I am your host, Makiza Latifa, and I'm thrilled to have you with us. Let's begin with China Currents with Lisa, our deep dive segment featuring some of the topical issues and news emerging from China in the past week. It includes stories on how Trump's China policies are raising concerns among American universities, a new company that will make Shanghai a city in the sky, and a very interesting story of a Chinese city earning 80% of the global Christmas market profits. Stay with us for more details.
China Currents is a weekly news talk show from China to the world. We cover viral news about China every week and also give you the newest updates on China's cutting-edge technologies. Let's get started.
Merry Christmas and welcome to China Currents, your weekly news report on what's happening in China. I'm Lisa. In this episode, a Chinese city earns 80% of global Christmas market profits. Trump's China policy are raising concerns among American universities. A new company will make Shanghai a city in the sky. First, let's take a look at how Christmas boosts China's economy. There are over 2 billion people in more than 160 countries that celebrate Christmas. And according to the Irish Times, a Chinese city called Yiwu makes 80% of the world's Christmas decorations, providing around $60 billion worth of goods to all over the world every year. Typically, orders are placed in February or March and shipped from China by July, sold by wholesalers to retailers between August and October, and then put on shelves before Christmas. According to data released by Yiwu Customs on the 19th of December, the city's trade volume reached over $82 billion in the first 11 months of 2024, with a 70.6% year-on-year increase, which is about $70 billion. To meet holiday demands, retailers typically stock up months in advance. However, this year, concerns over higher shipping costs and tight logistic capacity caused by the Red Sea crisis prompted European and American buyers to place orders more than a month earlier than usual. To ensure timely deliveries, many Christmas products were shipped via the China-Europe freight trains than before, ensuring that overseas clients received their goods in time for the holiday season. This way of shipping offers significant advantages. Its transport cost is about 1/5 of that air freight, while delivery time is roughly 1/4 of that sea shipping. According to EU Customs, from June to August this year, the transport of Christmas goods via the China-Europe freight train increased significantly, reaching markets in Europe and 5 Central Asian countries, Russia and other regions participating in the Belt and Road Initiative. As Chinese manufacturing continues to expand globally, the freight train also brings back many products loved by Chinese customers. In the first 11 months of this year, EU's total imports reached nearly $10 billion, a 90% year-on-year increase. At the same time, US retailers are pushing over the edge. A report on the 21st of December by Bloomberg highlighted that the extra income usually generated by Christmas sales is coming too late this year. Struggling with the dual impact of inflation and higher borrowing costs, many US retailers and chain stores are on the brink of collapse. Of particular concern is the rise of tariffs imposed by the US government, which have added further strain on already struggling retailers. Despite the fact that Christmas trees made in EU remain cheaper than domestically produced ones in the US, the newly imposed tariffs have significantly increased the cost of American consumers. These additional tariff costs have ultimately been passed on to US customers, effectively taking money directly out of their pockets. This policy not only harms US retailers but also adds extra economic pressure on ordinary consumers. Not just retailers, American universities are also having a hard time. According to The Guardian, Harvard, Brown, and a number of other universities in the US are issuing warnings to all international students to return to campus before Donald Trump's inauguration. This is because he threatens to invoke a travel ban in 2016, which has led to over 4,000 people being refused visas. Cornell University is concerned that China could be added to the list. Over the past decades, there are 1.1 million international students at US universities. They contributed $43.8 billion and supported over 378,000 jobs. One quarter of them are from China, contributing $14 billion to the American economy. Meanwhile, as of 2023, China has more than 3,000 colleges and universities, with nearly 47 million students engaged in higher education. Last year alone, over 10 million undergraduate and 1.3 million graduate students were enrolled nationwide. Additionally, China's colleges and universities now employ over 2 million faculty members, marking a 5% increase compared to the previous year. Hopefully, when students from Africa and South America are turned away by Trump, China can provide an alternative for students to receive professional education overseas. Moving on the 20th of December, Shanghai Low Altitude Economy Industry Development Company was officially established, aiming to challenge Shenzhen's dominance in the field. Shanghai's ability to compete lies in a significant comparative advantage. According to the paper, Shanghai is home to 300 drone companies and attracts 70% of the nation's aviation professionals. Of the 5 Chinese companies that have successfully conducted maiden flights of passengers carrying eVTOLs, 4 are based in Shanghai. This dense concentration of enterprises and talent positioned the city to attract substantial investments in the low-altitude economy. For example, although the low-altitude economy industrial park in Jingshan district was only launched in October this year, it has already drawn 36 companies with a combined investment of $411 million in just 2 months. Investor confidence in China is further strengthened by the government's proactive approach. One of the biggest challenges to develop a low-altitude economy in major cities is ensuring the safety of drone flights over residential areas. This year, Shanghai's municipal government introduced 150 low-altitude air routes, creating aerial tunnels free from obstacles and signal interference. These routes have significantly improved the safety of drones operation in urban settings. According to the Civil Aviation Administration of China, the market is expected to reach $480 billion by 2035. But in Shanghai, drones are not just about profit. In August, the city launched its first drone-based medical delivery route, successfully airdropping emergency medication to an elderly resident. As urban traffic congestion increasingly delay ambulance response times, these medical drones offers a lifeline, buying critical time for patients suffering from conditions like heart attacks or asthma and potentially saving more lives. And that is all for today. Thank you for watching this episode of China Currents. If you have any thoughts or comments about our show, please reach us at the email address below, and we look forward to hearing from you and see you next time.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And next on the show is the Thinkers Forum, where we engage with brilliant minds and their perspectives on the complexities of China's evolving role in the world. Today, we'll hear from Don Deba, a journalist and current affairs commentator who'll be speaking largely on his coverage of the US elections and other related issues. Please stay with us for more details.
So I was there as a journalist. That's my role. Among other things, I was covering it for the evening news on Pacifica radio station KPFK in Los Angeles. And I was working with a team of people. We'd have people on the street. There were many protests, particularly Gaza protests and Ukraine war protests in Chicago, particularly against the Democratic Convention. We'd have people with the protesters streaming this video and interviews, people in the studio that we had set up to discuss that, and then live streaming that out, in addition to recorded material that we sent to our various media outlets, for me to KPFK for the evening news. This year was different in a number of ways, including the fact that most people knew that by the time of the election, Joe Biden would not be the nominee, even though he had been pretty much the only person running in the primaries. That's how it was engineered. And Donald Trump was a runaway in the primaries in the Republican Party. Everyone knew he was going to be the chosen candidate at the very beginning because he's extremely popular among Republican voters. That has been contested by polls, except for the final poll, which demonstrated it rather resoundingly. When we were looking at the way that the conventions were being managed, one of the things that we were looking at was the way it was handling what was happening in the street, and particularly again in Chicago. The Republicans had very little street protests. There were some what we call hired, I don't know, vans with electronic displays on them that drove around the convention center during the highest traffic parts before it, as people went in and as people went out. There were two of these vans or three, I wasn't sure, and very little else. There were no protests of any consequence, maybe 10 people, 5 people. Nothing like what we saw in Chicago, where there were, thousands and thousands of protesters. The way that the Democrats handled it was pretty much to ignore it and to focus on the stage on the convention, where they had an interesting display of neocons and generals for the party that was supposed to be putting democracy on the ballot. Well, my point there was to cover it as a journalist. I didn't really get any surprises. I had thought maybe there would be a surprise replacement of Kamala Harris with Hillary Clinton. I don't know, maybe they couldn't engineer it or whatever. That didn't happen. And nothing about the Republicans surprised me. Trump came out of there with a bump, which everyone expected. And he went on to win, which most people didn't expect, but I did. I'm 70 years old. I remember vividly the 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago. I didn't attend it, but it was on television, pretty much unmediated, and there was tremendous violence, police violence. They beat the hell out of protesters. There's a very strong anti-war protest in 1968. It was brutally suppressed by Mayor Daley at the time, and there were repercussions throughout the legal system and the culture and the political system for years afterwards. I started going to the conventions as a journalist regularly in 2004. I was at the Republican convention in New York in particular, and the atmosphere even then was it's almost like watching a movie of a close-up look inside of, say, Nazi Germany. The police presence is overwhelming. The weaponry on the police is, of military grade. There are so many police and weapons on display, corrals around the protesters, and massive protests in 2004 against the war in Iraq. And then in 2008, I went to both conventions. In Denver, before that, I saw a police officer with a baton hit a man in his late 70s, early 80s, right across the head. I heard a crack when it happened, and the guy was out. I don't know if they killed him or what. There was a brutality to the exchange between the police and the protesters then that was out of scale, inappropriate for the mood of the protesters, which was not threatening violence at all. The police presence was so overwhelming, I didn't see them get brutal that way, but they pepper sprayed just about everyone that they saw. You would have maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people corralled into a city block like the intersection, and then the police would come in and they would just fire tear gas canisters and spray from different spraying devices into the people. I saw an instance, for example, outside of Sears in the state capitol, near the state capitol building in St. Paul, where a group of horseback police were firing from the front of the store into the parking lot. I don't know, maybe 15 or 20 of them along a line, tear gases into a crowd that was really standing there with signs. And it's gotten worse each time. In 2016, when Hillary Clinton and Trump were running, this was the most interesting one that I saw. Anyway, the situation at that time, Clinton had won, at least according to the Democratic National Committee, he had won the primaries. So there were lots of voters that had voted for her for certain. That convention was held in Philadelphia. And Trump was, had just made his entry into the presidential race and won the primary elections also pretty handily. So they had a convention at first for the Republicans in Cleveland, and the left, well, the groups that call themselves the left here in the United States, swore that they were going to go to the RNC, the Republican National Convention, and shut it down. This was a slogan that was carried around, and an interesting alliance between Hillary Clinton supporters and the left at that time. Now, when we got to Cleveland, I got a hotel room outside the perimeter, and we had credentials to go in 2016. I'm staying about a mile outside the perimeter, and I call a taxi. A taxi comes and takes us. Talking with a cabbie and saying it would show us the protests because we understand there are going to be these massive protests. And the cab driver says there are no protests, and there won't be any protests here. So I thought he was, referring to the police being, brutal and or otherwise well organized. And he said no. So Cleveland is one of the what they call Rust Belt cities here, where it was built on manufacturing and related industries that have long since gone, and so the people are in a state of despair and have been for decades. Um, he said that the only person in the entire campaign this year and for the last two or three presidential elections that's offered to promise to bring these people's jobs back is Donald Trump. This guy had two PhDs, one in history and one in sociology, I think, or some related field, political science. Says he says whether you believe him or not, no one else is even raising the question. No one else is even acknowledging that this is a problem that needs to be solved. He said they are not going to protest him. And then he drove me around the perimeter of Cleveland, and it's surrounded by these empty factories where the people that live in the city see every day the places that they used to work, pay their mortgage, and for their housing, the kids' college tuition, and all of that. So that was interesting to see that Donald Trump, the fascist, had that response. This is how he was being characterized. Had that response from the people in Cleveland. And then when we got to Philadelphia, there were massive protests in the streets against the Democratic Party by people in, Philadelphians, black and brown particularly, and also people that had come from across the country to protest against the war making. If you were watching this on television, you would have seen that the Democratic Convention was a picture of party unity, peace, love, and kumbaya. And the Republican Party was a bunch of conniving people, each trying to force out Trump because nobody likes him and somebody else wants to be top dog with protests and everything. But it was exactly the opposite of what we saw. Democratic Convention in 2016, for example, every day, the Sanders delegates, who were almost half the delegates, would stand up and walk out. And you're in a basketball arena. So when half the people walk out, like 7,000 people or something, stand up and walk out, where we're sitting in the immediate area outside the internal arena, where the vendors and everyone would be, you see it. You see a mob come out and gather. And we'd interview them. Well, why are you doing this? And the reason was that they were being mistreated, that they felt that the election was stolen from Bernie Sanders, that the issues that they had been drawn into be active in the party over were being completely ignored, and that they didn't want to have any part of it. None of this came across in the media. So, looking at this, you know, mediated only, by the media without actually being there, which is how almost everybody sees it, not just, on the other side of the world, but right here in the United States, you would have an entirely different picture of what's happening than what was actually happening. Now, see, the way out is going to not be up to the U.S. I guess I'll put it that way. Instead of saying the American economy or the U.S. economy, I'll say the economy inside the United States, because I see the economy as a much larger fabric than the national activity. And the borders between them may well be recognized as legal borders and political jurisdictions with, military and police enforcement, etc. But they're rather random historical artifacts in terms of how the global economy actually operates. The reality is that as long as you have national borders and national economic policy, you have national markets, and particularly you have, in this case, a national labor market. In addition to that, as long as you have some nation states that have no military or little military and other means to protect themselves, and a behemoth like the United States, you're going to have super exploitation of countries that drive people to leave because there's no food for them to eat, etc. People come to the United States from all over Latin America and Africa and parts of Asia because they're following their stuff here. The global construct, the empire, whatever terminology you prefer, has a flow of goods and services out of the countries that they call the global south into the metropole, into the United States. You have to do the same thing with tariffs. There were factories in the United States across the board, beginning with when the Europeans came here, more or less, and beginning with the creation of factories. Henry Ford was here, right? People like that. There was a massive manufacturing center, one of the engines of the victory of World War II, although it's not acknowledged here that China was one also. In the post-war period, and particularly beginning after the normalization of relations with the U.S. and China, and some other things that were done at that same time with the U.S., there began to be an outflow of manufacturing facilities, jobs, etc., out of the United States. A lot of it ended up in or around China, and elsewhere too, by the way. And one of the two most competitive things, I think, were low labor costs, relatively speaking. China wanted these factories. They needed the factories to help develop the country. Here you had strong unions that had secured rights that the government wouldn't secure for them. But the owners of the factories did not want to have to deal with workers here on par. They preferred to deal with China's government. So politicians here offer as a solution to the problem an equalization of price because of the labor differential, supposed labor differential, and tariffs would be the solution to that in their view. What they haven't taken into account, which is fundamental, is that if the tariff price is what the item, say an automobile, would go for manufactured in the United States, with the cost of the regulatory environment and of the higher cost of labor, if that's what it is, whatever, factored in. But if this is what it would cost if this car were manufactured in Detroit, you're leaving something out. It wasn't manufactured in Detroit, and so the guy who would be buying it with UAW union wages doesn't have the money to buy it. So you might keep China's cars out by doing that, but they're not going to be able to buy any other cars either. You got to give people jobs. You have to start the economy organically. Now, I don't know. Do tariffs fit into an overall scheme? Not just some political rhetoric and to bash China or to favor say GM over some Chinese automobile manufacturer, whatever. Those are all questions that are the day-to-day business of governments. I don't know who decides whether it's going to be Mitsubishi or build your own or Chevrolet that's going to dominate the U.S. market. There's so many decisions the government can make that can affect that outcome, that all of the governments involved can make that can affect that outcome. I think that the issue of tariffs is being treated here in extremely simple terms, almost symbolic terms. And I'm hoping that those involved are more sophisticated and that understand that they are mobilizing popular support for some difficult negotiations they intend to hold that may end up looking like a compromise on the question of tariffs or may end up looking like a victory, quote unquote, on the question of tariffs. We're looking at an economy that's also distorted because of all of the sanctions that they have. I was in Cuba last week. Cuba's, a golf shot from Florida. If I can't hit it that far, but maybe Trump can from Mar-a-Lago. They there's 12 million people living there that would buy 12 million people's worth of stuff on a daily basis from the United States. Can't sell them anything. Can't sell them toilet seats. You can't sell them anything. It's ridiculous. These political decisions. And, these people are all supposed to be free trade advocates and all of this. It's the most restrictive, fascistic, in terms of fascism has economics to it. This is the state intervening on behalf of private interests in the economy. That's fascist economics. And like the others, it is highly inefficient. It creates more contradictions than it resolves. Just one more small thing. It's an anecdote from 2016 that may give you a peek of my thinking about this. I was asked to go to Washington, D.C. after Trump was elected to have a meeting with Corey Lewandowski, who was one of the campaign organizers for 2016 Trump. And when I went down there, it was an event that he was keynoting, featured at the time Trump's appointment for the Export-Import Bank. And so there was a public session with this man speaking and then taking questions and answers. We're in a world where China can go from place to place, Latin America, Africa, wherever, come into a country and say, I see in this region here, you have people, 2 million, 5, whatever people, they lack electrical grid, sanitary sewers, housing, roads, all the infrastructure. And we see that you're not able to meet this under your current economic conditions. We can build you a city. We'll build you a city. We'll build you a transportation link to the ports or to the rail system that we're constructing or whatever. And find a way to finance it in a way that is uplifting to the economy with the intent to be to make the people there consumers, customers of other Chinese business and others. They're doing this, I said, and this is their intent. It's part of this win-win strategy. And meanwhile, in the United States, we have people, some of the best construction engineers, laborers of all kinds, masons and carpenters and sheetrockers and steel workers and all of that, and equipment rusting in the parking lot because no one can figure out how to finance that kind of activity when you have this tremendous demand domestically as well, but around the world, where something like a third of the population doesn't have fundamental infrastructure. It could keep people busy make people prosperous for the next 50 years building it. Why is it that we can't do that? And this man said to me, right there from the podium, I'm glad you raised that question because that's the first thing I intend to find out myself when I go to work next week. And he was at the job for about a month and then gone. No one ever heard of him. So there's a fundamental problem here around basic economics that needs to be resolved. And I think when we're talking about tariffs in isolation, it just reveals uh, the nature of the real problem here. I There's a term I can't use because it's a vulgarity, but what it means is it's all appearance. The actual work of these departments, with a few exceptions, is not going to be done by those people. They are political payments, either after the fact or in advance. There were lots of people at Fox that gave Trump the air that he needed to win the campaign. I don't know how that worked in the background. I don't know if he was dealing with individual producers, with Rupert Murdoch or whoever the hell runs that place now. There are others. He's a business person, and you trade what you have for what you want. Um, there is very little precedent, really, in recent years among cabinet members for any of the uh, cabinet members outside of maybe the State Department and Defense Secretary to have any actual skills or experience in the field that they were appointed to. They're rather political appointments, and there is an actual skilled layer of administrators immediately underneath them. I don't know who his deputies are yet. I do know that Trump has a rich stable, for lack of a better word, of talent to draw upon for particularly business related things. A lot of his image is image and not necessarily the reality of it. He is, to a large degree, his business is to be a face for others that are at the real power behind the throne. He licenses his name on building projects that are built by others for money. I think he understands that game very well and is glad to have this or that person be the face of the department while someone else is the hands and the backbone. The biggest challenge for facing Trump is to get control of his own government. Generally, historically, for a group to attain control of the levers of government from another group that are as hostile to each other as Trump and the so-called deep state appear to be, generally requires a revolution. There was certainly a popular movement that supported his electoral win and his placement in the presidential office. If that happens, there's a good amount of time between now and January 20th when he's inaugurated. But once he gets in, his task is going to be the same as it was last time, which is to try to actually govern. You're seeing already the resistance being organized even among Republicans in the Senate against Matt Gaetz, which is one of his key appointments. He's appointing Matt Gaetz as Attorney General and giving him the task of going after everyone that has been abusing power and using it as a political weapon. Getz has been on that theme for a couple of years now since they started doing it. And he particularly has been pointing to the relationship between arms manufacturers and members of Congress who have been key in continuing the wars. The one is just finished finally for the moment in Afghanistan, and the one in Ukraine, that he considers there to be deep corruption that's enabled these wars, and it drives these wars, and he aims to put an end to it. That is one of the fundamental levers of power of the people that supposedly have been displaced by this election. So the first task is going to be to actualize that, because they are still in a position to resist it, and we're going to see how that is true as that battle develops. If he can get past that and gain some measure of control of his own government to face the world, I think the way things went with the DPRK with North Korea last time is a good model for both China and others like Iran. I think that he has a very keen sense of what Senator Mike Mansfield referred to as only a Nixon could go to China, in reference to the rapprochement, or the recognition of People's Republic by the United States backed by Nixon. Because Nixon had been such an anti-China hawk, or anti-Chinese revolution hawk, for decades, that no one could say he was being soft on communism or whatever, which was what they used as political weapon, if he went and normalized relations. And so that's what he did. We saw Trump with a massive public relations campaign against Kim Jong-un prior to his meeting with him, and a very rapid turn of events once they actually sat down and started to negotiate. It may be portrayed as bromance or whatever, that this is some personal relationship, but, people that pay any attention to this stuff understand these are two heads of state, and that they represent clusters of interest on either side, and that when they're speaking in the media, it's public relations. And so, what he was doing was softening up the public so that the Democrats couldn't say, and they still do, well, he gets along with Kim Jong-un because he likes tough leaders and, whatever the word is, authoritarians. And Putin, the same thing. The rhetoric is intended to soften the blow, the political fallback for a change of course. If I were president of the United States for a week, I would sign all kinds of commercial and legal and political treaties with everyone, and I would order the dismantling of the U.S. military. That would be the one thing I would try to accomplish right away, because that, I think, is the course that's really the salvation of humanity from where we are right now. That has to happen pretty soon. We're I mean, just the people that are concerned about climate change, the largest consumer of fossil fuels on a daily basis is the U.S. military, flying helicopters around Korea and jumbo jets around Europe and whatever for no reason whatsoever other than to prepare for a Holocaust. I think Trump sees the world in that way too. And I think he has people around him who are working on that. And I believe we may see a period of some really tense rhetoric and perhaps even low-level military exchange. But I think the intent will, in any event, the result will be not just a normalization, but a warming of relations and a flourishing of business across the board. And in this case also, I'll say for a change, even though the U.S. is the imperial monopole and an awful lot of wealth flows here that shouldn't, a healthy international economic situation would also benefit workers in the United States.
Very interesting presentation right there. And that concludes another engaging episode of China Now. From the thought-provoking ideas in today's Thinkers Forum to the latest developments shaping China's future, we hope you're leaving with fresh insights and a deeper understanding of the stories that connect us all. Thank you for spending your time with us. My name is Makiza Latifa, reminding you to stay curious, stay informed, and continue exploring the threads that tie us together in this global tapestry. We'll be back next Saturday morning with more stories, perspectives, and conversations that matter. Until then, take care, and we'll see you same time next week on China Now.